Hi, and welcome to our second video on feedback. Today we're going to talk to you about some strategies that we use for feedback in the classroom. They're quite varied, some more to do with marking and some more to do with ways that you might do things every day just while you're talking to the kids. So Sid, what are your thoughts on feedback in the classroom?
So I've realised recently that I need to make more time for feedback because I think it's one of those things that's overlooked, and you probably think as a teacher that you naturally do give plenty of feedback, but actually I probably don't give enough actually, and it's really valuable. So I think it's a really good thing for us to recap some of the main ways that we can give good encouraging feedback.
Okay, right, let's start with the first one that I think we're going to talk about. So this one's one that's kind of come from a lot of research areas that we've read about over the years. And this is the idea that a lot of the time we kind of give almost two kinds of feedback at the same time. And this is the idea that basically we quite often tell a kid how well they've scored or how well they've done, and also tell them how to improve at the same time, which can kind of sometimes be counterproductive. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one because it's so tempting to write comments on their work. Even small comments like you cross out a word and replace it, or you write a short sentence on their work. But I think it is probably true that they don't pay enough attention to that comment when they're just looking at their score. So it's really important to separate these two things. I find it difficult and I have to remind myself to do that. But I do think that the students benefit from having the two things come separately.
Yeah, and I think it's something we've kind of looked at within our kind of schemes of work to kind of say that certain pieces of work that we do are very much focused on saying that you need to achieve this particular grade, marking it and giving the score on that particular piece of work to say, you got a grade C, you should have got a grade B, or you got a grade A, well done, that's above your target grade, and then perhaps having a separate piece of work where it's a case of going through it and saying, well, you did do these things well, but actually you need to work on these two or three things, and actually allocating a specific little chunk of time to actually work on that piece of feedback and actually improve it, which
It's
I think
that
is kind of key.
variation, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they get a bit of both that way. I think that something that I tried recently as well was to give feedback without scores on a test because that really threw them off and they were really desperate to have their scores.
Mm.
But I said, look, you're going to focus much better on the feedback if you just wait for the score. And they actually did. So that worked really
Mm.
nicely.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I tried the last time we gave back one of our last formal assessment pieces was actually to give them back the test and the answers before they actually received their own scores
Hmm.
back. So we actually showed them the test paper after they'd done the test with their answers, went through what the answers should have been, and they were actually quite frustrated to know how they'd done, but they actually had to focus on what the answer should have been. And then obviously the lesson later on, they found out, well, they got an A, they got a B, they got a C. But had they had that the lesson before, they would spend all lesson going, I got this, I got this, I got this, rather than focusing on what they should have done in each individual
Yeah.
question.
I think it's nice because it's inconsequential for them, so they don't kick themselves too harshly when they say, "Oh, I realise what I've done," but they haven't got their test paper in front of them to be harsh on themselves. They can just actually take that constructively.
Mm, great. Okay, right, on to the next little idea that we've got. And it's this one. And it's to do with, we think, the amount of marking that perhaps we do. Um, and obviously, this depends on kind of the level that you work at, and obviously, perhaps the subject that you work in. I think as to maybe how much feedback you give into student books, or in some subjects whether we even use books. Because obviously, in computer science, which I teach a lot of, we don't even use books particularly. But it's just the amount of feedback students receive, and it's thinking, well, what is the level that we work at in terms of how much feedback we actually provide? What do we think about this one?
I definitely agree that it varies by subject, and it also varies on the type of question within the subject. So I know, for example, in geology, they have short answer questions where I might just do a tick or a cross, and there isn't always room for writing effective feedback on there because it's more beneficial to just go through the maths with them. Whereas if it's a long answer question, I might actually give them some written feedback on there. So I vary the type of feedback and the amount of feedback that I give. And in geography, what we do is we provide sheets. So we don't write on their actual work, we provide them a sheet, and that has a space for small comments, which I think they probably pay attention to separately to having a look at their own work. So I quite like that technique. How about yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, it kind of makes me think back to a place that I worked at previously to my current place. Is we actually had within our schemes of work certain sort of signposted pieces of work, probably two or three per topic, which were sort of signposted as really kind of deep dive pieces where they might get a little bit of feedback as they went through in the rest of them, but these 2 or 3 pieces they got really deep feedback on. So they knew that when they did that piece, it was marked much more deeply.
Mhm.
And then there was a specific piece of time built into lessons where they would have to go back and respond in depth to that and actually get it re-looked at again once they had done so to see how they'd improved that piece of work. It was actually called Make a Difference Time, uh, basically because they had to make a difference. It was shortened to Mad Time. Some people liked that, some people didn't. But yeah, it was known as Mad Time. It did actually spread from actually that school to some of the other places in the authority as well.
I like Mad Time. I might use that.
Okay, yep, great. Okay, on to our next one. And this one's this idea of maximising student improvement. And this idea that quite often when they finish a piece of work, they kind of don't know where to go with it. And I think this can be something that could be peer assessed as much as kind of something that we do. And it could be a case of doing, for example, like a 9 mark, 12 mark long answer question. And we actually give them maybe a set of criteria that go into that 9, 12 mark question and say, okay, you peer assess it, look at each other's work and set, okay, spot several of the criteria they have done, spot several of the criteria that one of the other students hasn't done, and give them 2 or 3 quick what went well's, even better ifs, swap back over, do it. And then the teachers can quite quickly use that feedback and then make some kind of either, could be summative, could be formative judgment on it to make a bit of progress.
Totally agree. I love this one, and I do it so frequently that my students just know that that's what we're about to do. I think I must do some sort of gesture, and they just know it's coming. And I will get the students to swap work with each other, and sometimes I say swap with somebody different this time, whether that's in front of you or behind you, but they know that they're about to do what went well, even better if. And sometimes I call it 2 stars and a wish, so 2 things that went well, 1 thing that they would say constructively, what their peer might do better. And I like to do this one without a score as well, so that they are really focused on the content of the exam question that they've just been doing. And they tend to respond really well because I think they take the feedback less harshly when it comes from their peers. So I really like this technique, and I use this quite often.
Yeah, and it's one of my favourites because it's one that gets an awful lot out of them in terms of the amount they move on with potentially not actually that much effort in terms of teacher workload and teacher time to actually gain a lot of progress from the students. Okay, and this one's an interesting one. I've put this one as kind of marking student work live, and I think this covers many of the things that teachers don't realise they actually do
Yes.
in the classroom. I'll see what you think.
I love doing this. The students are instantly on edge when you put somebody's work in front of the class. So I use the visualizer, and I might do this for a long answer question so I can really show them how I get my teeth into a long, meaty question, going through word by word, circling things, highlighting things, putting comments on the edge. And they can also see then how long it actually takes to digest a student answer and what an examiner might be recognising. And then obviously we'll have a bit of a joke, oh, this person's missed this thing, and they take it in good jest. So I do really like this technique, and I think that they appreciate it as well.
Yeah, and it's amazing, strangely, how good they can get at it. Because it almost gets to the point where they become almost as good as you do at marking each other's work and spotting things within pieces of work. I mean, I've done this with AI work, weirdly, where I've got them to do, for example, quite a long answer question, got an AI to do the same question, and basically said to them, what score would you give the AI? And they go, like, well, I wouldn't give it 9, I'd give it perhaps 7 because it's missed this. And they're really quite good at it once they get trained well in this kind of thing.
Yeah, it's really clever flipping their perspective to be the examiner. I think it's so beneficial for them to see the question in that different light.
Yeah, superb. Right, and then finally, quick summary. So I think the main things we've covered, we've kind of gone through the idea of not doing 2 types of feedback at the same time, making things kind of summative or formative. We've had a look at kind of not doing too much, kind of focusing on the things that make a difference and not kind of making your workload overly counterproductive by trying to mark everything. Thinking about making things open-ended and actually getting the kids to do a lot of the work, and even getting the kids to almost become the examiner. What do you think about the key points?
I'm going to adopt MAD technique. I think that's brilliant. I'm going to keep using what went well, even better if. And I think also I'm going to try to be more encouraging in my feedback. And I know the students quite often get disheartened by the feedback. So I'm going to try to do more positive comments That's where I'm going with this. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's more of the doing things live in class, because quite often I get kind of sometimes bogged down in kind of like the day to day, getting through the content, getting it taught, and it is nice to just spend a bit of time getting the kids to just stop and spend time actually
Mm,
looking at what they've done and actually reflecting on what they've learned themselves. I
yeah.
think it's really important to spend a bit of time doing that.
Yep.
Okay, well, I hope you've enjoyed those tips. If you want some more, please head to the TNL Canvas if you work at Ashton, and if you don't, please like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much.
Bye.